11 below zero, and the boy should not have been outside. But there was a light down in the hollow, where no light had any business being. For 3 nights running it had burned, warm and amber and still, down where the old rail line lay buried under half a century of snow and silence, down where the rails were gone, the ties were gone, where nothing living was supposed to be left at all. And tonight he was going down to it, boots laced, a dead man's coat pulled tight against the dark, each step through the frozen crust cracking loud as breaking bone. Somewhere ahead, through the black trees, that warm light waited. It did not flicker. It did not move. It simply held, as though it had been lit on purpose, and was waiting with a terrible patience for him to come. He did not yet know whose hands had lit it, or what one frozen night was about to unbury. But the cold was already in his chest, and there was no turning back now. The thermometer on the cabin wall had dropped well below freezing when the boy finally gave up on the idea of sleep. He lay still a while longer, listening. The fire in the small iron stove had settled into a low orange breathing, and the wind outside had gone quiet. Too quiet, the way it does in the deep cold of winter, when the whole mountain seems to be holding its breath, waiting on a word it has not yet decided to speak. His name was Eli. He was 19 years old, and for the better part of a season now, he had been alone on this ridge. Alone in a cabin that smelled of wood smoke and old wool, and the faint, fading memory of the man who used to live here, his grandfather. The cabin sat high on a wooded slope, far from any town worth the trouble of naming, the kind of place a person goes when they no longer wish to be found. The road that climbed up to it turned to soft mud whenever the rain came down hard, and the nearest neighbor was more a rumor than a fact. A single thread of chimney smoke, glimpsed once, miles off, through a thin gap in the trees. Eli had wanted it that way. He had come up here to disappear, not in any dramatic sense of the word. He wasn't running from the law, or from anyone who might come looking. He was running from something far quieter than that, something that lived down inside his own chest, and woke him in the small dark hours, and would not let him rest no matter how he turned. A feeling, a failure he could not seem to set down. His grandfather had raised him. That much was simple enough. The boy's parents had slipped out of the picture early, the way some people do, leaving behind no forwarding address and no good reason. And the old man had stepped in without ever being asked, the way some other people do. He had taught the boy how to split wood along the grain, how to read the weather coming over the far ridge, how to stay still long enough to let his own fear settle and find its shape. "Patience isn't waiting," the old man used to say, in that slow, gravel-soft voice of his. "It's watching while you wait." Eli had carried those words a long way, and he had carried something a great deal heavier too, because at the very end, when it had mattered most of all, the boy had not been there. The old man had gone quietly, in the dark hours before a winter dawn, while Eli was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that no longer seemed to matter in the slightest. He had told himself he would drive up and visit the next morning. He had told himself, the way the young always do, that there would be time. There had not been time. And the last true thing his grandfather had ever asked of him had been such a small thing, said almost lightly, the way the most important things in a life sometimes are. It had been an evening much like this one, the two of them sitting close by the stove, the wind out, walking the ridge. "Whatever else you do in this life," the old man had said, watching the fire instead of the boy, "don't you let anybody be left behind. Not if you can help it." He had paused there, and something had moved across his weathered face, slow as a cloud shadow. A person left out in the cold, with nobody coming back for them. That's about the loneliest thing there is. The boy had nodded. He had meant it too. The way the young mean things, easily, and without yet knowing the true weight of them. And then, when the moment came at last, he had left the one person who mattered most to face that same cold all alone. That was the stone he carried. That was the reason he had climbed up here to the very ragged edge of nowhere. Not to heal. He did not believe anymore that healing was a thing that happened to a boy like him. He had come up simply to be somewhere the silence on the outside might match the silence locked up inside. Somewhere he could not let a single soul down. Because there was no longer a single soul left for him to disappoint. So he split his wood. He patched the place on the roof where a winter snow had worked a hole clean through the old rusted tin. He boiled his coffee in a battered enamel pot and drank it black, and watched the gray light shift and change over the valley through the long, short days that ran together until he stopped bothering to count them. And he tried, without a great deal of success, to feel nothing at all. It was the light that finally broke the pattern. The first night, he very nearly missed it altogether. He had stepped out onto the porch to bring in an armload of split oak for the morning, and something had snagged at the far corner of his eye, down in the hollow below the cabin, where the trees grew thick and tangled, and the land folded itself down into shadow. A glow, warm, amber, low among the black trees. He had stood there a good while, the cold biting straight through his shirt, the firewood forgotten in his arms. Then it was gone. He told himself it was nothing at all, a trick of a tired eye. A star caught low through the branches, maybe, or the moon finding the surface of water somewhere down there in the dark. He carried the wood inside and built the fire back up, and did not let himself think on it again. Until the second night. It came back. The same place, the same warmth, steady this time. Not flickering the way a fire flickers, not swinging the way a lantern swings when a person carries it out walking. It simply sat there among the trees, patient, glowing, as though it had been set down on purpose and lit on purpose, and was waiting now, with a great and quiet patience, for him to turn his head and look. He watched it for the better part of an hour. It did not move, and something cold that had nothing at all to do with the weather settled in along the back of his neck. Because the boy knew that hollow. His grandfather had carried him down through it once, years back, when Eli was small enough to ride high on the old man's shoulders beneath the low branches and feel for a little while like the tallest thing in all those woods. There was an old rail line down there, a spur, his grandfather had called it. A line that had not carried a single train in longer than anyone still drawing breath could rightly remember. The iron rails were gone. The wooden ties were gone. The forest had crept patiently back in and taken everything it could reach, leaving behind only the shape of the ground itself. And down at the far lost end of that vanished line, half swallowed up by the spruce and the leaning hemlock, there stood a station, a small one. A whistle stop, the old man had called it once. The kind of place a train might pause at for half a minute, on its way to somewhere that mattered a good deal more, and then forget entirely the moment it pulled away. It had stood empty for the better part of half a century. No glass left whole in the windows, no sound but the wind, no reason on this earth for a warm light to be burning anywhere inside of it. And yet, there it was. By the third night, the boy had stopped pretending he was not going to walk down there and see. He waited until the light came back, low and gold among the trees. Then he laced up his boots, slow and deliberate, his fingers gone stiff and clumsy in the cold of the cabin. He pulled on the heavy canvas coat that had belonged to his grandfather, the one that still hung a little loose across his shoulders, as though it were patiently waiting for him to grow the rest of the way into it. He checked the knife on his belt, more out of old habit than out of any real fear. And then he stepped off the porch, down into the dark. The cold met him like a flat hand against the chest. It was the clean, absolute cold of high and lonely places, not the wet, creeping cold of the lowlands that worms its slow way into your bones, but something far sharper and somehow far more honest about itself. It made the snow squeak and complain under his boots. It made each breath bloom white in the air before his face, and then dissolve away into nothing at all. The snow on the open slope was crusted hard over the top, frozen back over from the day's brief and grudging thaw, and it broke beneath his weight with a sound like cracking knuckles. Loud. Too loud. He slowed his step without entirely deciding to. Some old instinct, handed quietly down through the blood, telling him not to go announcing himself out loud before he understood just what it was he might be announcing himself to. The tree line swallowed him whole at the bottom of the open field. Beneath the heavy canopy, the temperature dropped again. 3 degrees, maybe 4. The cold pooling down here in the low hollow the way still water pools in a sunken place, settling and sitting. He could feel it at his collar, at his wrists, where the cuffs of the old coat did not quite reach to meet his gloves. It was darker in here. The branches hung low and heavy with their loads of snow, and the thin starlight that had guided him clear across the open ground could no longer find a way down through them. So he moved by memory and by feel, picking his careful way along what had once been the bed of the rail line. You could still read it if you knew the way to look. A faint, raised grade, running off straight through the trees, unnaturally straight, in a place where nature never troubles itself to make a straight line. The earth packed harder underfoot than the soft and yielding forest floor around it, as though the land itself still remembered what had once been asked of it, all those years back, and went on holding the old shape out of something that felt almost like loyalty. His grandfather had taught him that too. How the land remembers. The light was ahead of him now, maybe 200 yards on, through the dark and crowded trunks. And the nearer he drew to it, the stranger the thing appeared. It was far too steady to be any kind of fire, far too warm in its color to be anything electric. It had the soft amber tremble of an open flame, a lantern sheltered from the draft, but not sealed away from it, sitting on some surface or other inside that ruined and forgotten building. He stopped. He made himself stand still and watch a while before he moved another step, the way the old man had taught him. And as he watched, the station came slowly into its full view between two dark and leaning trunks. It was smaller than he had remembered it. One room wide, perhaps 30 feet long, with a sagging roof that dipped low across the middle like the swayed spine of an old and tired plow horse. The clapboard siding had weathered all the way down to a soft silver gray. One of the two front windows had been boarded over, years back, with a single warped sheet of plank. The other had not. And through that other window came the light, warm, trembling, alive. The boy stood very still among the trees, and he let the cold work its slow way deeper into him while he stood and studied the thing laid out in front of him. There was no vehicle anywhere, no tracks in the snow that he could make out from where he stood, no boot prints, no tire ruts pressed into the white, nothing at all to say that a living soul had passed this lonely way in years. Above the door, a faded tin sign still held the ghost shape of letters, though he stood far too distant from it to read out their meaning. And then he noticed the wood. Against the south wall of the station, a small and tidy pile of split logs had been stacked, neatly. The cut faces turned out toward the weather, the way a person stacks their wood when they know exactly what they are doing, and have known it well for the better part of a lifetime. And the snow that lay across the top of that woodpile was thin, maybe 2 inches of it, which meant down here, in this deep and sheltered hollow, beneath all of these heavy and snow-laden trees, that the wood had been set there recently, within a small handful of days. Someone had been here. Someone was here. The boy's heart was going now, slow and hard, not panic exactly, something a good deal steadier than panic. The old instinct again, rising up cold and clear through the center of him, telling him plain as daylight that he was no longer alone out here in these woods, and that whatever it was that waited inside that warm and trembling window had stacked its wood with care, and lit a clean and patient flame, and had not troubled itself in the least to hide that light away from the ridge above. He thought about turning back. For one long, white, exhaled breath, he thought hard about the cabin and the fire and the heavy door he could still go back and close against the whole of this. The simple, dark, familiar silence of the life he had so carefully built for himself up there on the ridge. And then he thought about the light, how it had come 3 nights running now, how it had seemed, almost, to be waiting on him to look, as though something down here in the dark had been patient in exactly the way his own grandfather had always been patient, watching while it waited. He could not have told a living person why that one thought moved him the way it did, but it moved him. He took the first step out from the cover of the trees. The frozen cinders of the old rail bed crunched loud beneath his boot, sharp in all that absolute quiet, and he understood at once that whatever was inside that station had surely heard him coming now. He took another step, and then one more. He was perhaps 40 feet from the door when the light inside the station changed. It did not go out. It moved. The amber glow slid across the boarded glass, traveling the way a lantern travels when a person lifts it up and carries it slow toward a window. And the boy stopped dead where he stood, 1 foot still half raised above the cinders, his breath caught somewhere up between his chest and his throat. For 3 or 4 long seconds, Nothing at all happened. The wind found a gap somewhere up in the old eaves and made a low, mournful note, almost like a voice straining to remember the shape of a word. The cold pressed itself in against him from every side at once, and then, slowly, the door of the station swung open inward. The light spilled out of it first, a wide, warm ellipse of it spreading across the snow. Gold poured out against the blue-black dark, and somehow so beautiful in that frozen and forgotten place that it caught the boy hard, low down beneath his ribs, where he had thought he had stopped being able to feel much of anything at all. And then a figure stood there in the open doorway, small, broad across the shoulders, wrapped up in something dark and heavy that the boy took for an old canvas coat, not so very different from his own. There was no weapon that he could see anywhere, no sudden movement. The figure simply stood there in its own spreading pool of light, one hand resting easy against the door frame, the way a person stands out on a porch when they have heard slow footsteps coming through the dark, and are not in the least bit surprised to hear them, as though they had been expecting someone. The boy did not move, neither did the figure in the doorway. The two of them stood there in the deep, biting cold, 40 feet and a whole lifetime apart. The lantern light pooling on the snow in the space between them, and the wind singing its low and broken note out through the eaves above. Then the figure spoke. The voice was old, worn down, smooth by long years and longer winters, quiet in the particular way of people who, ages back, stopped needing to raise their voices at all in order to be heard. It carried clear across the frozen ground without seeming to take any effort at all. And what it said made the boy's breath stop entirely in his chest. "You took your time getting on down here, son." A pause. The wind itself seemed to hold still and listen. "Your granddaddy always swore you would." The words landed in the boy's chest like a smooth stone dropped down into still water, and the ripples went all the way down into the deep and frozen over places he had climbed this whole mountain to keep quiet and undisturbed. He had told no one his name. He had told no living soul whose grandson he was. There was no road that came to this place, no phone line strung through these woods, no way on this green earth that a stranger, living all alone in a ruined station at the dead and forgotten end of a vanished rail line, should have known the first small thing about him. And yet the old man had spoken of his grandfather, in that warm and present weight of someone who had known the man, and known him well, as though the two of them had sat and talked together about the boy not so very long ago, by some other fire, in some other hollow. On some night, the boy himself knew nothing whatsoever about. The figure stepped back from the doorway, not retreating, making room. It was an old, old gesture, and the boy understood it the way you suddenly understand a language you never knew you spoke. An offer, an open door, a held-out warmth set out across all that cold. "Come on in out of that," the old man said, "before the weather goes and changes its mind on us." The boy looked back, just once, the way that he had come, up the dark slope toward the cabin and the banked fire and the heavy door he could still climb back up and close against the whole of this, the careful, quiet, solitary life of needing no one. Then he looked again at the light, and he stepped forward, toward the station, toward the stranger who somehow already knew his name. and toward the night that was, even then, only barely beginning to unfold. The 2 stone steps up to the door were worn smooth in their centers, hollowed out by the slow passage of feet the boy would never live to meet. He climbed them slowly, one and then the other. The boards beneath the porch overhang were dry. He noticed that small thing before he noticed almost anything else. The very way the old man had once taught him to read a stranger's woodpile before he ever shook the stranger's hand. Dry wood meant care, and care meant a soul who paid attention to the world. He stepped through the open door, and the warmth of the small room closed itself around him like something soft he had long ago forgotten he needed. There was a stove going in the far corner, an old potbelly burning strong and low, its damper set just exactly so for a long and steady heat instead of a quick and wasteful blaze. A canvas pack leaned against one wall, a bedroll rolled and squared away with care, a tin cup resting on the worn plank floor, and a single lantern up on a battered wooden counter, throwing its amber light up the length of the cracked and peeling plaster. And the old man himself. Up close, in the light, he was older by far than the boy had guessed from out among the trees. Much older. White stubble scattered across a deeply weathered jaw, a wool cap pulled down low over his brow, and eyes that had been quietly studying the boy from the very moment that door swung open, taking the careful measure of him with a slow, unhurried patience that felt, somehow, almost painfully familiar. The old man pushed the door shut behind him, against the cold. He nodded toward a low wooden crate set down beside the stove. "Sit yourself down," he said. "You've got the look of a boy who's been carrying something heavy a good long while now." He paused. The fire popped softly into the quiet of the room. "I expect you've earned the right to set it down a spell." The boy did not sit. Not yet. He stood there in the warm, small room, the snow melting off his shoulders and dripping down onto the worn plank floor. And he looked at this stranger who spoke of his grandfather as though the man had only just that moment stepped out into the next room over. And he asked the single question that mattered above all the rest. His voice came out of him lower than he had meant for it to. "Who are you?" The old man held his gaze a good while, and something moved, deep behind those weathered eyes, something that might have been sorrow, or might have been the deep, slow, settled ache of a thing that has been carried for far too many years now, and set down for far too few of them. Then he turned and reached up to a narrow shelf above the counter, and he took down a small box. It had been black once. The paint was worn away now in patches, dull gray iron showing through from underneath, soft orange rust gathered up in the corners where the old folded edges met. It was the kind of box a person picks out when they mean for a thing to outlast them by a good long while. He set it down on the counter, in the space between them. He did not open it. "Sit yourself down, son," the old man said, and his worn voice had gone very quiet now. "And let me tell you about a boy who got himself left out in the cold, years and years back, before your time or mine." A pause. The lantern flame leaned and steadied and held. "And about every last soul who ever once tried to bring him on home again." Outside, the wind rose up once more through the broken eaves, low and patient and old as the hills themselves, and far above them both, up on the dark and empty ridge, The little cabin sat with its fire burning slowly down to coals, waiting in all its silence for a boy who would not be climbing back up that long slope the same as he had come down it. The boy sat, not because he had decided to, exactly, more because his legs had gone and decided it for him, the way they sometimes will when a person has been standing braced against something for far too long. The wooden crate took his weight without a single complaint. The stove breathed its low orange breath into the small room, and the lantern held its steady amber flame, and for a good stretch, neither one of them said a single word. The old man simply stood there by the counter, one weathered hand resting light on the lid of that small iron box, looking down at it the way a person looks at a door they have not let themselves open in a great many years. Then he sat too, down onto the floor, with his back set against the wall, in a slow and practiced way that told the boy this was how the old man had been sitting for a long time now. He pulled the lantern a little nearer to himself across the worn planks, and he began to talk. He did not lead up to it. He did not say, "Let me tell you a story," or "Your granddaddy was a good man," or any of the openings the boy might have braced himself for. He started somewhere in the middle of the thing, the way people start when they have carried a story all alone for so long that the telling of it has already happened 100 times over in the dark behind their own eyes. There was a boy, the old man said. The fire popped softly into the quiet. Younger than you. A good deal younger. Small for his years, the way some of them get when there's been nobody around to feed them right. He paused and turned the tin cup slowly in his hands. And one cold night, years and years gone now, that boy got left at this very station. The boy went still on his crate. Left, he said. It was not quite a question. Left, the old man said again. And he let the one small word sit there in the warm air between them, like a stone set down careful on a table. Not lost. Not wandered off in the dark. There's a world of difference between those things, and the difference is the whole of it. He turned the cup again. He was set down out there on that platform, with a little pack at his feet, and then he was left behind. The boy's eyes went, without his meaning them to, toward the boarded window, toward the dark and the snow, and the rotted-through platform he had walked along on his way in. He tried to picture it. A small boy. A pack. The cold coming down out of the trees. Who does a thing like that? He said. The words came out harder than he had meant them to. Out here. Leaves a child out here. With nothing. The old man did not answer that one right away. He reached out instead and lifted the lid of the iron box. It rose with a small, dry sound. The sound of an old hinge that has not been asked to move in a good while, being asked gently to move again. Inside, beneath a layer of waxed paper gone the soft color of old cream, there were things. The old man drew them out one at a time. Slow. Careful. The way a person handles things that cannot ever be replaced. A small stack of photographs, black and white, the edges gone soft and worn with handling. A folded paper, brown along all its creases, and down at the very bottom of it, catching the lantern light and holding on to it. A pocket watch, gold-cased, its thin chain coiled neat beside it, the way something sleeping curls in on itself. He handed the boy the photographs first. The top one showed this station, but a different station than the ruin the boy sat in now. a living one. The same timber framing above the eaves, the same low and honest proportions. But the platform out front was crowded thick with people, men in heavy coats, women with their hair pinned up against the wind. A train at the far edge of the frame, blurred just slightly, the way the old pictures always blur the things that were moving. The boy turned to the next one, and this one stopped him cold. It showed a single figure, standing all alone on that same platform. A small figure, narrow through the shoulders, a serious face on it, a face far too serious for how young it plainly was, a pack set down on the boards at the feet, and one small hand resting flat against the station door. The very door the boy himself had come through not 10 minutes before. The light in the picture fell from somewhere behind the figure. Through the station window, the same window that glowed warm and amber at the boy's own back, right now. "That's him," the old man said quietly. "That's the boy that got left." Eli looked at the small, serious face a good while. "How long?" he asked. His voice had dropped. "How long was he out here?" "Before somebody came for him." The old man was quiet a while. The lantern flame leaned, and then it straightened. "Now that," he said at last, "is the very heart of it. That's the part a body has to understand before the rest of it means a thing." He looked up, and there was something in those weathered eyes that was not quite grief, and not quite wonder, but lived somewhere in the long country between the two of them. Nobody was coming. The folks that left that child weren't ever coming back. And the boy knew it. Knew it down deep, the way children always know the very things we pray they don't. A pause. "But there was a man who worked this station back in those days, the man who kept the line running through here. And it was that man who found the boy out there on the platform, in the cold and the falling dark." The boy waited. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he had stopped breathing. "And here's the piece of it," the old man said, "that I have turned over in my mind on more nights than I could rightly count for you." He leaned forward, just a little, into the lantern's reach. That station master, he did not have to do one single thing about it. A child left at a whistle stop, in the dead heart of winter. Why, that was no business of his at all. He could have sent word on down the line, and washed his 2 hands clean of the whole matter, and gone home, and slept just fine. The fire breathed. He didn't. The old man reached down into the box again, and this time he lifted out the pocket watch. He held it there in his open palm, where the gold caught the light and gave it back warm. The boy had this on him, he said. Just about the only thing of any value he owned in the whole wide world. And before he would let that station master take him one step anywhere, in out of the cold, the boy set this watch down, right here on the counter, right about where that very lantern's burning now. He paused, and he said he would come back for it. Inside of a week, he said. He gave his word on it. The boy frowned down at the watch. Why would he leave it, if it was the only thing he had left? Because, the old man said, and something soft moved into his voice. A boy who has just been left behind by every soul he ever knew. Why, that's a boy who has got no reason left in all the world to believe that anybody, anywhere, keeps their word. He turned the watch slow in his palm. So he gave away the one thing he had, and he tied a promise to it. to see, to test the thing out, to find out whether a promise was still a thing that meant a single thing at all, whether this world was the kind of place where a body comes back for what they swore they'd come back for. The lantern flame trembled on its wick. He was checking, the old man said, quiet as anything, checking to see whether the world was a place worth the staying in. The boy looked down at his own 2 cold hands. He said nothing at all, but something had shifted in him, low and quiet. A kind of ice he had not even known was packed in their beginning, just along its hard edges, to give way. The station master took the watch, the old man went on. Any could have slid it into a drawer and let himself forget all about it. Folks make a promise to a frightened child just to settle the child down, and then they go right on and break it, and tell themselves it was for the best. He shook his head, slow. Not this one. Not this man. He reached then for the folded brown paper. He did not open it. Not yet. He only turned it over, once, in his weathered fingers, as though he were feeling for something worn down into the old creases. This man kept a book, he said. Not the official one. The line had its own book for that. No, this was his. Private. His own hand. He wrote down in it the things that he took notice of. The weather. The trains coming through. The faces that passed and didn't match up to the manifest. A pause. And after that one cold night, he started writing one line into it. The same line. Over and over and over. The boy looked up. What line? The old man unfolded the paper now, slow, along its soft old creases, the kind of soft that only comes from a thing being opened up and folded back a great many times, across a great many years, by hands that needed to read the same few words one more time. He held it out where the lantern could find it. The ink had faded down to the pale color of weak tea, but the hand was careful and clear. The hand of a man taught his letters in some hard old schoolroom, the kind where they would rap a child's knuckles raw if he dared to rush. He wrote it down every week, the old man said, every single week, for years on end, just 3 words. He let his eyes rest on the page a moment, holding for return. The boy did not say anything. Holding for return, the old man said again, softer now. Like a prayer, maybe. Or a promise a man makes to his own self, on behalf of a child who'd been taught that the whole world breaks its word. He smoothed the page flat with one finger. He held on to that watch, week after week after week. And he set those 3 words down each and every time. The way a body keeps a candle lit in a window for someone who's gone a good ways out into the dark. The boy looked at the small, serious face in the photograph again, out there on the platform, alone. And he thought, without ever meaning to, of his grandfather's own words, spoken by this very kind of fire, about a person left out in the cold, with nobody coming back for them. The loneliest thing there is. The boy came back, the old man said. It was said the same plain way he had said all the rest of it, level, with no drama hung around it anywhere, just the fact of it, set down gentle, the way a man sets a good tool back on the bench after a hard piece of work, with care, because the thing has gone and earned that care. Something in the boy's chest pulled tight. It was close to sadness, but not quite that. Something quieter and harder to name. He came back, Eli repeated. Took him a good while, the old man said. Longer by far than the 1 week he'd promised. The kind of long that changes a child clean into something else. He glanced toward the dark door. But he walked back in, right through that door at your back. And the station master, he was standing here at this counter, same as he had ever been. The fire shifted low in the belly of the stove. And the first thing that boy said, the old man went on, wasn't hello, wasn't a word of sorry for the time he'd taken. It was, he paused, and his old voice dropped down to almost nothing at all. It was, I told you I'd be back. The lantern light wavered, and then it held. And the station master, the old man said. He gave the boy his watch. Didn't make any kind of speech out of it. Didn't ask the child where he'd been all that time, or what he'd had to walk through to find his way back here. He just handed it on over. A small breath. Said the asking would have been an insult to a boy who'd gone and kept a promise that nobody in this world had ever given him a single reason to keep. The boy sat very still. Outside, the wind had gone quiet. He had not marked the moment it stopped. But the station held a different sort of silence now. Not the silence of an empty, forgotten place. The silence of a thing that had been, somehow, made whole. So that's the story, Eli said at last. His voice came out rough. A boy got left. A man kept his watch for him, and the boy came back. That's the start of the story, the old man said, and he looked at the boy in a way that lifted the small hairs along his forearms. Because here's a thing worth the asking, the old man said. What does a child do? A child who learned, out there on that cold platform, that the whole wide world breaks its word, and then learned, against everything he had braced himself to expect, that one man in it would not. The boy waited. What does a boy like that grow up into? The fire breathed its low orange breath. He grows up, the old man answered himself soft, into a man who cannot abide the sight of anybody left out in the cold. Not a stray dog, not a stranger on a road, not one living soul. He nodded slowly, to himself, to the long wait of the years, because he knows down in his marrow exactly what it is, to be the one set down on that platform with the dark coming on fast. And he knows what it was worth more than gold, worth more than that watch ever could be, to lift up his head and see one solitary soul coming back across those boards toward him. He set the watch down gently on the counter. The small sound it made was very loud in the quiet room. That boy, the old man said, spent the whole rest of his days keeping a candle lit in the window for other folks, the very way it had once been kept that cold night for him. And the boy understood then that they were no longer talking only of a stranger out of some far-off time. He looked at the photograph held in his hands, the small, serious face, the hand laid flat against the door, and slowly, the way the warmth of a fire reaches you only after you've been a good while out in the cold, a thought began to move through him. Who was he? Eli said. His voice had changed entirely. The boy. Who did he grow up to be? The old man held his eyes for a long beat. There was something gathering behind those weathered eyes now. Something that had been waiting, the boy understood all at once, behind every single word of this whole telling. Patient. The very way the light down in the hollow had been patient. waiting on him to look. You ever stop and wonder, the old man said gently, why an old man would hold on to a watch like this one through all his years, tucked away in a box like that, wrapped up so careful, like something a body fully means to pass on when his time comes? The boy's mouth had gone dry as ash. You said it belonged to the boy. I did. You said the station master gave it back to him when he finally came home. I did say that, the old man said, and he surely did. He reached out and turned the watch over there in the boy's hands, so the worn back of the gold case came up into the lantern light. There were letters cut into it, worn soft by long years of handling, initials set into the gold by some careful hand a good while ago. The boy looked down at them, and the breath went slowly out of him, because he knew those letters. He had seen them carved into the worn handle of an old buck knife, stamped into the inside cover of a weather-cracked Bible up on a cabin shelf, pressed deep into the soft leather of a billfold he had never once been able to make himself throw away. They were his grandfather's initials. The boy looked up. The old man was watching him close, and his weathered face had gone gentle in a way that was almost hard to look upon. That boy who got left, the old man said quietly. The one out there on the platform in the cold, with the little pack at his feet, and not one soul in the world coming back for him. The fire breathed. Was your granddaddy. A long while before he was ever anybody's granddaddy at all. The whole room seemed to go very still around the words. The lantern held its small flame steady. The stove held its low and patient warmth. And the boy sat there on the rough wooden crate with the photograph of a small, serious child held in his cold hands. A child he had never once met. A child who had grown up to become the only man who had ever truly raised him. He looked at the small face out on the platform, and he saw it now. He could not unsee it, not ever again. The set of that small jaw, the seriousness sitting in those eyes, far too old for the years behind them, the patience, that terrible, learned, far too early patience. He never told me. The boy said. His voice had gone down to almost nothing. All those years, all that time, he never said one single word about it. No, the old man said. No, he wouldn't have. He nodded, slow. Some things a man just doesn't tell, and not on account of being ashamed of them either, but because they're the very root of him. The thing the whole rest of him grew up out of. He paused. A man doesn't go around pointing at his own roots. He just stands on them and lets them go on holding him up. The boy looked down at the watch, his grandfather's watch, the one and only thing a frightened, abandoned child had set down on this very counter all those years ago, as a test of whether the world was a place worth staying in. He came back for it, the boy said softly. After everything they did to him, after being left, he still came back. He came back, the old man agreed. And then he went and spent his whole life over, making sure that other folks, the ones who'd been left behind, the ones standing out on their own cold platforms in the dark, that they got somebody coming back for them, too. He looked at the boy, steady and unhurried. Including, he said, a small boy whose own folks slipped on out of the picture early, and left a child behind with no forwarding address, and no good reason at all. The breath caught hard in Eli's throat. He had never once thought of it that way, not in all the long years, that his grandfather, stepping in the way he had, without ever being asked, taking in a boy that nobody else on this earth had come back for, that the old man had been doing the one thing, the only thing, he had ever truly known how to do, keeping a candle lit in the window, coming back across the boards, for a child left out alone in the cold. The boy's eyes had gone hot and blurred. He did not trouble himself to fight it down. There was no one out here in the dark to fight it down for. "Why are you telling me all this?" he said. "Why now? Why like this, in the middle of the night?" He lifted his wet eyes. "Who are you?" The old man held his gaze a long while, and outside, very far off, away beyond the dark and frozen tree line, a single owl called out once, and then fell silent again, and the whole cold hollow seemed to lean itself in close and wait the very same way the boy himself was waiting. "That," the old man said softly, "is the next part of the story." He laid his weathered hand flat against the counter. "And it's the part," he said, "that's going to need the both of us to make it through this night." The lantern flame trembled on its wick, and somewhere out in the dark, far beyond the broken eaves, the wind began, very slowly, to rise once more. The old man did not answer the question right away. Instead, he set both his weathered hands flat against the worn plank floor, and slowly he pushed himself up to standing, the way a body moves when the joints have gone stiff with cold, and with years, and with too many nights spent sitting alone in the dark. And the boy saw it then, a thing he had not let himself see before this. The old man was sick. It was there in the slow and careful way he rose, in the small tremor that ran the length of both his hands, in the gray that sat just beneath his skin, the gray that the kind lantern light had managed, until this very moment, to keep hidden away. He stood a while, one hand braced hard on the lip of the counter, and waited for some wave of something to pass on through him before he would trust himself to take a single step. The boy was on his feet at once. "You're not well," he said. It was not a question either. The old man waved a hand at him, gentle, dismissive, the way the old will always wave off the worry of the young. "I've come through far worse nights than this one," he said, but there was less iron in his voice now than it had carried before. And when he crossed the small room to lay another log onto the stove, he had to stop halfway over the floor and rest and gather himself back together before he could go on. The boy stood and watched him do it, and something cold turned over, low and slow, deep in his chest. "How long?" the boy said. "How long have you been down here? Like this, all on your own?" The old man fed the log carefully in through the little door. He latched the iron shut on it. He stood and watched the new flames take their hold through the grate before he would give any answer at all. "Long enough," he said. Outside, the wind had begun to rise in earnest now. It was no longer that low and mournful note it had sung when the boy first came picking his careful way down the slope. There were teeth in it now. It found out every gap in the old eaves and shouldered its way roughly through them, and the whole station seemed to shudder around the two of them, the old dry timbers groaning, the way the timbers of an old ship will groan when the sea beneath it first begins to turn against it. The boy crossed to the one unboarded window, and he looked out. The snow had come up again, Not the soft and drifting kind that had lain so quiet over all the world when he first walked down. This was some other thing entirely. It came sideways now, driven hard and flat, so thick that he could no longer make out even the line of dark trees he had come down through. The night out past, the glass had gone white and wild and very close. "It's coming on bad," he said. "It is," the old man agreed from behind him, and there was a thing in the way the old man said it. Something quiet, something accepting, something far, far too calm, that turned the boy slowly around on his heel to face him. The old man had lowered himself back down to the floor, back against the wall, where he had been sitting before. His face was gray in the amber light, and his breath had gone shallow and quick, and he was looking at the boy now with an expression that the boy did not care for at all. It was the look of a man who has gone and made his peace with a thing. "You ought to go on now," the old man said, "while the way up is still open to you. Get yourself on back up that slope, to your own fire, your own roof, before this storm closes the path behind you for good and all." The boy did not move. "And leave you down here," he said. "I am an old man," he answered softly. "I've had my full measure of nights. More than ever was my share of them." His eyes held steady on the boy's. "And I would not see a young one freeze to death out on that bare ridge on account of stopping to fuss over some old body whose time has just about come round anyhow." The words landed in the boy like falling stones, because he had heard a version of them somewhere before. Not these exact words, no, but the shape of them, the terrible, gentle, self-erasing shape of them. The way a person talks when they have decided, somewhere down deep inside themselves, that they are not worth the trouble of the saving, that the world will go on turning just fine, and maybe even a little easier, without them left in it. And the boy understood, all in a rush, exactly where it was he had heard that shape before. He had not heard it. That was the whole horror of the thing. He had not been there to hear it. His own grandfather had faced his own last cold night through with no living soul beside him, and the boy had never once known what the old man might have spoken out into that dark. Whether he had said anything at all, whether he had looked at the very end for a face that never came, and found only the empty room around him, and made his hard peace alone. The boy had spent these long months up on the ridge trying his level best not to imagine it, and now here it was, laid out plain, right in front of him, wearing a different face, speaking the very same surrender, into the very same kind of dark. "Go on now. Save yourself. I'm not worth the staying for." "No," the boy said. The word came up out of him low and hard and certain as bedrock under snow. The old man blinked across at him. "Son, no," the boy said again, and he crossed that small room and got down onto his knees in front of the old man, so their two faces were level, so that there could be no mistaking the thing he was about to say. "I am not leaving you," the boy said. The wind screamed against the eaves above them. For a long beat, the two of them only looked at one another in the trembling lantern light. The old man, gray and spent and ready, at last, to let go of the rope. And the boy, 19 years old, with something risen up into his face that had not been there an hour before. "You don't understand," the old man said, and his voice had gone rough now, and it was not entirely steady anymore. What's coming on for me? It isn't a thing you fight off with a young back and a strong arm. It's just the end of a long road. That's all that it is. And there is no shame in a body lying down at the end of a long, long road. Maybe there isn't, the boy said, but there's a difference. What difference? The old man said. The boy held his eyes. There's a difference, he said, slow and careful, weighing each word, between a man lying down at the end of his own road and a man being left to lie down all alone. The old man went very still. My grandfather taught me that, the boy said, though he never once put it into those words. He didn't have to put it into words. He just lived it. Every single day of his life. He never let one soul be left out in the cold, if there was any way under heaven he could help it. The boy's voice cracked clean across the middle, and he let it crack open. And I am not going to be the one who finally breaks that. Not with you. Not on this night. Not after everything you've just told me. About who he was. About where he came from. About what it cost a frightened, abandoned child to set that watch down on this counter and walk off into the dark, believing he might never lay eyes on it, or on kindness, ever again. He reached out, and he took the old man's cold hand up in both of his own. You kept the light in the window for me, the boy said. Both of you did, the whole of my life, and I never even knew that you were doing it. The tears were running freely down his face now, and he made no move at all to stop them. So I am not going up that slope. I am staying right here, on this floor, by this fire, and we are going to get you through this night, the two of us, together. Do you hear me, old man? The old man looked at him, and something moved deep in that weathered, failing face. Something the boy could not have put a name to, but that he felt go through him like a current through water, a loosening, a letting in, the look of a man who had braced himself for the longest time to be left behind in the cold, and who was being, against everything he had come to expect of this world, gently refused that ending. Stubborn, the old man whispered. Lord above, you are every bit as stubborn as ever he was. I learned it from the best there was, the boy said, and for the first time in all of that long night, the old man smiled. It was a small thing, a weak and trembling thing, but it was real, and it reached all the way up into his eyes. Then the smile faded from him, and his eyes drifted closed, and his head tipped slowly back against the wall behind him. And for one terrible heartbeat, the boy was certain the worst had already come for them both. Hey, the boy said. He gripped that cold hand hard. Hey now, stay with me. Open up your eyes for me. The old man's eyes came open, slow, and swimming, and unfocused. Tired, he murmured. So awful tired, son. I know it, the boy said. I know that you are. But you are not done yet. You hear me? You don't get to be done yet. Not on this night. And then the boy did the only thing in this world he truly knew how to do. He went to work. It was, he would come to understand a good while later, the very thing his grandfather had been quietly preparing him for the whole length of his life, without either one of them ever once saying so out loud. All those cold and gray and ordinary mornings, All that slow and patient teaching that had felt, at the time it was given, like nothing more than another round of chores. How to read a fire the way you'd read a man's face. How to build up a heat that holds the whole night through. How to keep a living body warm and breathing through a hard, dark hour in a hard, cold place. He had thought, sunk down in his grief these past months, that all those hard-won skills had been for nothing at all, that he had failed at them the one and only time they had ever truly mattered. But here they were now. Here was a second hard night, come round again. And here was a man who needed, with his very life hanging on it, the exact things the boy's own two hands knew how to give. He stoked the stove, not for a quick and showy blaze, but for the long, low, building heat the old man had banked it for in the first place. He found the woodpile out against the south wall, and he brought it in, armload after heavy armload, out through the screaming storm, his bare face going numb in the driving snow, his arms set to burning, his fingers slowly losing all their feeling, until there was wood enough stacked dry inside that ruin to outlast whatever the long night still meant to throw down at them. He took the old man's thin bedroll, and he laid it out close beside the warm iron of the stove. He half lifted and half coaxed the old man over onto it, and he was frightened, deep down, by how little the man weighed in his arms, by how light a thing the old man had let himself become out here, all alone in the dark, with no one ever coming. He pulled his grandfather's heavy canvas coat off of his own back, and he spread it out over the old man, like a blanket against the cold. "You'll freeze, son," the old man protested, weak as a guttering candle. "I run hot," the boy lied to him. "Always have done." The wind howled on around the eaves. The old station groaned in every joint and timber. The one lantern flame guttered and leaned hard over, and somehow, against all of it, went on holding. And the boy settled himself down for the long fight ahead. He kept the fire fed. He fed it the way the old man had taught him, the way his grandfather had taught him before that. A log set just so against the coals, the damper eased a half turn, the patient hand of a person who knows that heat is not made all at once, but coaxed, slowly, out of the dark. And every time those tired eyes began to drift and to fall closed, he kept the old man talking, asking him questions, anything at all that came to mind, just to keep that fading mind tethered tight to the warm and living room around it. "Tell me about him," the boy said. "About my grandfather. Tell me about when he was a young man." And the old man, roused up gently by the asking, would talk a while, in a thin and failing voice. But he would talk. He told the boy small things, true things, the kind of things no old photograph could ever hold inside its faded silver edges. He told him how the boy who got left had grown on up into a young man who could not so much as pass a hungry stranger on a road without stopping to turn out his own two pockets. How he had taken in, over the slow course of the years, not just the one lost and frightened child, but more than one, quietly, without ever once making a thing out of it, or asking a single word of thanks for it in return. How that little cabin up on the dark ridge had seen more cold and abandoned and half-wild children come in through its door and walk back out of it again made whole than any living person would ever rightly come to know. "He never told me one word of that," the boy whispered. "Course he never did," the old man breathed. "A man who keeps a light burning in his own window. Why, he doesn't go and stand out in the yard pointing up at the flame for folks to see. He just keeps the thing burning, steady, and he lets the ones who need it most find their own way in, out of the dark. The boy stared a good while into the fire, and he understood then a thing he had not understood before this night. He had come up this mountain believing himself to be the last of something, the final, failed, broken off end of a line. A boy who had been handed everything good in this world by one good man, and who had gone and repaid the whole of it by not being there at the end when it counted for everything. But that was not the shape of it. That had never once been the true shape of it at all. He was not the end of the line. He was a link in it. The watch had passed from the cold hands of a frightened, abandoned child into the keeping of a faithful station master who would not let a promise die in his drawer. And then back again, long years on, into the hands of that same child, grown up at last into a good and gentle man. And that good man had then gone and spent the whole rest of his given days passing the very same gift along, hand to hand, child to child, down through all the dark. And now, here was the boy, down on his own two knees by an old iron stove, in the very heart of a screaming storm, keeping a dying man warm through the longest dark night of all the year. He had not broken the chain after all. He was the chain, right now, in this very moment, with his own two cold and cramping and aching hands. The night wore on and on and on. There came a stretch, somewhere down in the deepest part of the dark, when the boy was sure, down in his bones, that he was losing. The old man had gone quiet, and would not be roused by any question the boy could think to ask him. His breath had grown so shallow and so faint that the boy had to lay his own ear flat against the man's thin chest just to be certain it was still there at all. The fire seemed, against all his work, to throw out no heat against the storm that pressed in hard and hungry from every side at once. The lantern had burned down low, and then lower still, and the boy, alone in that ruined place, with a fading life held cupped in his two hands, felt the old fear come rising up through the center of him. The fear that he was, in the end of things, simply the kind of person that things slip away from, the kind who always arrives a single moment too late, who does the wrong thing, or else does the right thing far too slowly for it to matter, and who is left, when all of it is said and done, with nothing in his hands but the cold, and the silence, and the unbearable weight of an empty chair he sat down in too late. He bowed his head down low over the old man, and he did not pray exactly. He had never quite learned the way of it, but he spoke out into the dark, low and broken, to the man who was not there to hear him. "I wasn't with you," he said, "at the end of it, and I have carried that with me every single day since, like a stone I could never once set down." His voice came apart in his throat. "And I would give anything in this whole wide world, to have been there in that room with you, to have held your hand the way that I am holding his, right now." The fire popped softly in the iron belly of the stove. "So let me do this one thing," the boy whispered. "Please, just let me get this one thing right. Let me, just this one time, be the one who stayed." The wind, for one long moment, seemed to ease back from its screaming, and the old man drew in a breath, a deeper one, a real one, that lifted his thin chest beneath the heavy coat. And then, behind it, came another, The boy's head came up fast. He pressed his palm flat to the old man's brow, and he found it, against all of his fear, not cold and waxen, but warm. Warm with the steady, stubborn heat of the fire he had kept fed and burning all through the very worst of the dark. Warm with a life that had not, after all, gone out of the world while he watched over it. "That's it," the boy whispered. "That's it now. Stay with me. Just a little longer. It's almost morning. I can feel it coming on." He could not have told a single living soul how it was that he knew it. There was no window in that ruin that faced the east, no way at all to read a sky that was, in any case, buried deep and lost away behind the storm. But he felt it. The way a body feels a long and raging fever finally break, somewhere in the small hours of the night. Somewhere far out past the white and screaming dark, the very worst of the night had crested and turned over, and started its long, slow fall down toward the coming dawn. The boy fed the fire. He held the old man's hand in both of his own, and he waited, and he watched while he waited, the very way that he had been so patiently taught to do by a man who had learned its hard and bitter worth out on a cold platform a long while ago. Slowly, so slowly, the wind began to lose its terrible voice. The savage, sideways snow eased back into something gentler, and then gentler still, until at the last it was only drifting softly down again, the way it had been falling when the boy first set out down that slope 100 years before. The station's groaning timbers settled themselves, one and then another, down into stillness, and the lantern, burned down now very near to nothing at all, held up its one last small and steady flame against the gloom, and a thin gray light began, at long last, to seep in around the edges of the boarded window. Morning. They had made it, the two of them, through to morning. The old man stirred upon his bedroll. His eyes came open, and this time they found the boy's tired face, and they held fast to it, clear and present and knowing, in a way, they had not been for hours. "You're still here," the old man said. His voice was no more than a whisper now, but there was a great and quiet wonder folded up inside of it. "I'm still here," the boy said. The old man held his gaze a long beat, and his own eyes had gone wet now, the tears standing bright along the rims of them, catching the very last of the lantern's amber and the first thin silver of the dawn. "He used to tell me," the old man whispered, "that he was waiting. All those long years up on that lonely ridge, waiting on the day he would know, for dead certain sure, that the thing he had spent his whole life building up out of nothing at all, the kindness of it, had taken root down deep enough to outlast the man himself. A slow breath. That it would keep right on going, after he was gone on from here, in a pair of hands that he could trust to hold it." He lifted up one trembling hand, and he laid it against the side of the boy's face. "He was waiting," the old man said, "for you. All of that time, he was waiting on you." The boy could not find a single word to say back to him. "And you came down off of that mountain," the old man went on gently, "in the dead black middle of the night, out into the killing cold, walking on toward a light that you couldn't begin to explain to yourself, toward a worn-out old stranger who needed you more than he would ever have thought to ask. And you stayed. Through every last hour of it, you stayed. His thumb moved once, soft, across the boy's wet cheek. Son, he was not wrong about you. He was never once wrong about you. Not for a single day of your whole life. Outside, beyond the eaves, the snow drifted down. Gentle now, into the gray and slowly growing light of the brand new day. The fire burned warm and low and steady in the belly of the iron stove, and the boy knelt there in the quiet ruin of the old station, holding tight to the hand of a man he had first laid eyes upon only hours before. And he understood, at the very last, that he had not come down into that dark and frozen hollow to find a mystery, or a story, or some long-buried answer to a question he had been too afraid to ask out loud. He had come down into the cold to find the one thing in all the world he had stopped letting himself believe he would ever be given again. A second chance to stay. The morning came up slow and silver over the hollow. The storm had blown itself out somewhere in the last hours of the dark, the way the worst storms always seem to, spending all their fury through the long night and leaving behind, by dawn, a world gone soft and still and clean. The snow lay deep and unbroken over everything the eye could find. The trees stood patient under their heavy white loads, and the light that came in around the edges of the boarded window was the gentle, forgiving light of a day that had decided, against all the dark that came before it, to start over. Inside the old station, the fire burned low and warm. The boy had not slept. He sat on the worn plank floor with his back against the wall, the old man's hand still loosely held in his own. And he watched the gray light grow stronger and stronger, and he watched the long night finally, fully end. The old man slept, a real sleep now. Not the slipping away the boy had fought against with everything in him all through the dark, but a deep and easy rest. The kind a body falls into when it has, against all the odds stacked up against it, decided to stay a while longer in the world. The boy watched his thin chest rise and fall and rise again. And something in him that had been clenched up tight for months now, for far longer than months, began at last to come unclenched. He had stayed. That was the whole of it. That was everything there was. He had stayed, and the staying had been enough. And the man lying beside him was still drawing breath because of it. Out beyond the window, the new day was climbing up over the ridge, slow and sure, and the old man was still here in the world to see it come. It was, the boy thought, the first thing he had gotten wholly and completely right in the longest while. He did not move for a good stretch. He was afraid to, almost, as though the night had been a thin and fragile thing, spun out of fire and breath and stubbornness, and any sudden motion might tear it open and let the cold back in. So he sat still, and he held the warm hand in his own, and he let the morning come on in its own slow time. The lantern in the window had burned itself down to nothing in the small hours. He had not noticed when it guttered out. It had given everything it had to give to the night, and then quietly gone dark. Its work done. The boy looked at it now, that spent and empty thing, and felt a strange tenderness toward it. It had held on just long enough. That was all that had ever been asked of it, to hold on just long enough. He understood that now, better than he had understood almost anything in his life. When the old man woke, the sun had found its full way into the room. His eyes came open, and they were clearer than they had been all through the night. There was a little color come back into his face, where the gray had sat so heavy before. And when he saw the boy still sitting there beside him on the floor, he did not look the least bit surprised. He looked instead like a man quietly confirming a thing he had hoped for and had not quite let himself count on. "You stayed the whole night through," he said. "I told you that I would," the boy said. The old man smiled at that, slow and warm. "That you did," he said softly. "That you surely did, son." He pushed himself up, slow and careful, to sitting. The boy moved at once to help him, sliding an arm in behind his back, and the old man let him do it, which was, the boy understood, its own small and quiet kind of trust. They sat together a while in the morning stillness, the fire ticking low in the stove, the clean snow light filling up the whole small room, and neither one of them in any hurry at all to break the morning open with too many words. The old man looked toward the window, toward the world washed white and new beyond it. "There were nights," he said after a while, "when I'd about decided no one was coming. For me. Not ever." He said it without bitterness, just as a fact, the way he said most things. A body gets to a certain age out here on his own, and he starts to make his peace with that, starts to tell himself it's all right, that it's the natural order of a thing. He turned his head and looked at the boy. "But it isn't all right. I knew that, even while I was telling it to myself. It's just what a man says, to keep the cold out a little longer." The boy did not know what to say to that, so he said the true thing. "Somebody came," he said. "Somebody came," the old man agreed, and his eyes shone. "Right on down out of the dark, the way he always said one would." Then the old man reached out over toward the counter where the small iron box still sat just where it had been left, and he drew out the watch. He held it a moment there in his open palm, turning it slow, letting the bright morning light run gold along the worn old case, the initials on the back of it, the very same 3 letters the boy had grown up seeing, carved and stamped and pressed into the leavings of a life he had loved with his whole heart. "This was set down here years and years ago," the old man said, "by a frightened child who used it to ask the whole world a question, whether anybody, anywhere in it, would ever come back for him. He closed his fingers gently around it, and the world gave him his answer," the old man said. "Took its own sweet time about it, the way it does, but it answered him in the end. Yes, somebody will come back for you. And somebody did." He held the watch out, then, across the small space between the two of them, to the boy. The boy looked down at it, and he did not reach to take it. "It's yours," he said. "He gave it to you to keep." "He did," the old man agreed easily, "to keep and to pass on. When the time came round at last, and the right pair of hands showed up to take it from me." His eyes held steady on the boy's. "That's what a thing like this is truly for, son. It was never meant to come to a stop with any one set of hands. It was meant to keep on moving, down the line, on toward whoever's next to need it, toward whoever needs to learn that somebody, once, came back." He pressed it gently into the boy's palm, and he folded the boy's cold fingers over the top of it, one by one. "He'd want you to have it," the old man said. more than want it. He left it here all those years ago, in my keeping, knowing the day was coming when you'd find your way down. He as good as told me so. Plain. A soft breath. He said to me, when the boy finds his own way down to the light, you give him the watch. He'll understand the whole of it by then. The boy looked down at the watch resting in his hand. The weight of it was specific and serious. The weight of a thing that had been carried a great long way through a great deal of dark by more than one pair of faithful hands, and had come at the last to rest in his own. He understood it now. He understood the whole of it now. His throat had gone tight and aching. He could not have managed a single word if his very life had hung upon it. So he only closed his hand around the watch and held it hard against his chest and bowed his head down low and let the tears come on freely in the warm and forgiving morning light. The old man let him be. That was its own kindness, too. To let a young one weep and not go fussing over it. To let the grief and the relief and the long-carried weight of it all come up and out in their own good time, in their own way. The old man had learned, somewhere along his road, that some things in a person need to be let out before that person can stand up straight again. So he waited, and he watched the boy while he waited. And when the tears had run their course, he said one thing more. That weight you've been carrying, he said quietly, the one that bowed your shoulders the night you walked in here, about not being there, at the end, for him. The boy went still. He had not spoken of it, not once, all the long night through. He did not know how the old man knew. I see it on you, the old man said, answering the question the boy had not asked. Same as he'd have seen it. You can't carry a thing like that and not have it show. He paused. So hear me, son, and hear me good, because I'll only say it the once. He waited until the boy lifted his head. He knew, the old man said. He knew you loved him. A thing like that doesn't hang on whether a body's in the room at the last breath. It hangs on 10,000 ordinary days, stacked up one on the other, like cordwood against the cold. And you gave him those days, every one of them. His voice was gentle and certain. You did not fail that man. You never once failed that man. You were the warm light at the end of his whole long road. Don't you carry that stone one more step. You set it down. Right here. Right now. You've earned the right. The boy wept again then. But it was a different kind of weeping. It was the kind that loosens a thing. The kind that lets it go. When the boy could speak again, he wiped his wet face with the back of his hand, and he asked the question he had been carrying, unspoken, all the long night through. What happens now? The old man looked toward the window, toward the clean white world the storm had left washed behind it. Now, he said, you get to choose. Choose what? What you do with what you've been given, the old man said. That's the only choice that ever truly matters in the end of things. The rest is mostly just weather. He shifted himself, settling more easily back against the wall. You could take that watch, son, and go on back up your mountain. Live yourself a quiet life. Keep it tucked safe in a drawer to remember a couple of old men by. There'd be no shame at all in that. A body's earned the right to its rest. He paused. Or, he said, and he let that one small word hang there a long moment in the warm firelight between the two of them. Or you could do the other thing, the old man said. The harder thing, by far. The thing that he did. The thing this whole place was always meant for, from the very start. The boy waited, hardly breathing. Keep the light burning in the window, the old man said. The boy looked at him, and slowly, something began to take its shape in the boy's mind. Something that had perhaps been taking its shape since the very moment he first saw that warm light glowing down in the hollow. 3 nights running, calling him down out of his grief and his hiding and his long and bitter cold. He looked around the old station, and he saw it differently now. He could not help but see it differently now. He saw the sagging roof, yes, and the boarded-over window, and the silver-gray clapboard gone soft with all its years. But he saw, underneath all of that ruin, the good bones of the thing. A fine small building in a quiet place that had once been a true stopping point on somebody's long, hard journey. A place where a tired traveler could come in out of the weather. A place where a frightened child, with nowhere left in all the world to go, had once been found, and warmed, and watched over, and waited for. It did not have to stay a ruin. Nothing, the boy was beginning to understand, had to stay the broken thing it had become. This place, the boy said slowly, it could be made whole again, couldn't it? The old man's eyes brightened, like coals breathed on. It could, he said. Oh, it surely could. The roof could be patched up. The window opened back to the daylight. The stove kept burning through the cold. The boy was seeing it now, building it all up in his mind, board by board and nail by nail. And a light kept burning in that window, so that anyone passing through the dark, anyone with nowhere left to go, anyone who had ever been left out alone in the cold, his voice caught and held, would know, would just know, looking down from up on that ridge, that there was one warm place left in the world, where somebody would come back for them. Yes, the old man breathed. Yes, that's it. That's the very thing, son. A place, the boy said, where nobody gets left behind. And as he said the words out loud, he understood all at once that he was no longer only describing a building. He was describing a life, a purpose, a whole reason to come down off that cold and lonely ridge for good, and to put away, finally, the long and patient work of disappearing. A thing to give his 2 hands to, and his days, and the great grief that, until this very morning, had never once had anywhere else in the world to go. He had come up the mountain meaning to vanish from it, and here, in the ruin of an old forgotten station, in the company of a dying man who had not, after all, gone and died, he had found instead the one single thing he had stopped letting himself believe he would ever be given again, somewhere to belong, and something to belong to. The old man reached out and gripped the boy's arm. His hand was weak now, but the grip that was in it was real, and it was firm. He built that very thing, the old man said, up on that ridge, out of nothing at all but his own 2 hands, and the one hard lesson he learned right here, on this floor, a long while ago. His eyes shone wet in the morning light. He took in the lost ones, the left-behind ones, the ones nobody else would come back for. He gave them a warm place and a full plate and a person who would not walk away. A breath, and the greatest of all of them, the one he was proudest of in all his long years of doing it. He looked at the boy, steady and sure. Was you It was always you, son." The boy bowed his head down low. "And now," the old man said, softer still, "here you are, sitting in this very room, ready to go and do the same, with your own 2 hands, in your own good time. For whoever it is that comes next, down the line, stumbling on out of the dark." He squeezed the boy's arm once more. "The chain doesn't break, son. Not so long as there's just one link left in it that's willing to hold on." The days that followed all had a shape to them the boy had not known in the longest while, a shape made out of purpose. But there was a thing the old man had not yet told him. The boy could feel it, low down, the way you feel weather coming before you see it. Some evenings by the fire, the old man would start to speak, and then stop. His mouth would shape the beginning of a word, and then close on it, as though there were one last piece of the story still folded away somewhere, one last door not yet opened. And the boy, who had learned his patience from a patient man, did not push at it. He only waited. He watched while he waited. He knew the door would open when the old man was ready, and not one moment before. He brought the old man up the slope to the cabin on the ridge, where the roof did not leak, and the fire was easy to keep banked and burning through the night. He settled him there beside the stove, with the soft wool blanket the boy's grandfather had owned since before anyone could rightly remember. And he tended to him there, day after day. And slowly, by small degrees, the gray went out of the old man's face for good, and did not come back. He did not get fully well. The boy understood that, and did not fight it. Some roads do reach their natural end, and no amount of care in the world will turn them back the other way. But there is a difference, the boy had learned now, in the hardest possible way. A difference between a road that ends out in the cold and alone, and a road that ends warm and tended, and in good and faithful company. The old man would have the second kind of ending. The boy saw to that. He made certain of it. In those days, the two of them talked a great deal. The old man, it turned out, had a whole life in him that wanted telling, now that there was at last someone to tell it to. He told the boy stories of the grandfather as a young man, stories the boy had never heard, and would never have heard, had he not walked down into the dark that night. Small, ordinary stories, most of them, the kind that don't make it onto any stone or into any photograph, but that are, in the end, the truest measure of a man. He told the boy how the grandfather, as a young man, had once given his only coat to a stranger on a winter road, and walked home shivering, and never once mentioned it to a living soul. He told him how the grandfather had a way of knowing, somehow, which of the children who passed through that cabin needed a firm word, and which needed only a quiet one, and which needed no words at all but only to be fed, and let alone, and allowed to be safe a while. He told him that the grandfather had spoken of the boy, in his last years, more than of anything else in the world, with a pride that had nothing of boasting in it, only a deep and quiet satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who has planted a tree he knows will outlast him, and give shade to people he will never meet. The boy drank it all in, every word. He had thought in his grief that he had lost the grandfather entirely, that all that was left of the man was a stone and an empty cabin and a watch. But here, in the failing voice of an old stranger by a fire, the grandfather came back to him, piece by piece, story by story, more whole in some ways than he had ever been while living. That was a gift, the boy understood. Perhaps the greatest of all the gifts the old man gave him. Greater even than the watch, the gift of the grandfather, restored. And in the daylight hours, while the old man slept easy by the fire, the boy went down into the hollow, down to the station, and he began the long, slow, good work of making it whole again. He patched the sagging roof with salvaged sheets of tin, the very way his grandfather had once taught him. 6 cold hours, up on a ladder, with the wind picking at his coat. He pulled the warped plank off the boarded window and opened it back up to the daylight. He cleared away the rotted, dangerous boards from the old platform, and he cut and laid new ones in their place, squared and true, so that the old building stood up straight again, and proud. The way it must have stood, the boy thought, back when the photographs in the iron box were still new and sharp. He stacked the woodpile high against the south wall, cut faces turned out to the weather, the way a man stacks it when he knows full well what he's about. The work was hard. His hands cracked and bled in the cold, and his back ached at the end of each day. And there were evenings he climbed the slope so tired he could barely lift his own feet. But it was a good kind of tired, a clean kind, the kind that comes from building a thing, instead of from carrying one. He had not known that tiredness in the longest while. He had forgotten how much he had missed it. And every single night, before the dark came down over the hollow, he lit the lantern. He set it carefully in the window, and he let it burn. The old man, up in his chair by the cabin fire, would ask him about it each and every evening. "Did you light it, son?" And the boy would tell him, "I lit it." And the old man would nod, slow, and let his eyes fall closed, and rest easy in his chair, knowing the light was burning down there in the window, knowing that the chain still held, knowing that the long work of one good life had not, after all, gone out of the world. And then, on a still blue evening, the last door opened. The old man called the boy in close to his chair. The fire had burned down low. The light outside the cabin window had gone to that deep and quiet blue that comes on just before the full dark settles in. The old man's voice was very soft now, softer than it had been in all the days before, and the boy had to lean in near to him to catch the words at all. "You've done a fine thing here," the old man said. "A fine thing, son. He'd be proud of you. He is proud of you. I would stake my last breath on it." "You're not spending your last breath on anything tonight," the boy said. But he said it gently, without the old fear riding underneath it anymore. He had made his peace, by now, with the true shape of things, with the difference between a road ending out in the cold and a road ending here, warm by a good fire, with a hand to hold. The old man smiled up at him. "No," he agreed. "Not tonight, I don't expect, but soon enough now. And when it does come." He reached out, slow, and took the boy's hand in his own. "You'll be right here. And that's the whole of it, son. That right there is everything. A body just doesn't want to go on out into that last long dark all alone. That's all any of us ever truly wanted when you boil it all the way down. Just somebody to stay, right on through to the end of it." "I'll stay," the boy said. "I know that you will," the old man said. "I've known it for certain since the night you came walking down out of that cold. and planted your feet, and would not leave a dying stranger to face the dark by himself. His eyes drifted closed, content as anything. He chose right. He always did choose right, that man. Right to the very last. They sat a while in the quiet then, the fire ticking, the boy holding the old man's hand. And there was a peace in the room that the boy had not felt anywhere, in any room, for as far back as he could remember. "Can I ask you something?" the boy said after a while. "Anything," the old man said without opening his eyes. "That first night, when I saw the light down in the hollow." The boy hesitated. "You weren't carrying it. It wasn't moving. It just sat there, glowing, 3 nights running, almost like it was waiting for me to look." He paused. "How did you know I'd come?" The old man was quiet a moment. When he spoke, there was a smile in his voice. "I didn't," he said. "Not for certain. A man never knows a thing like that for certain." A slow breath. "But your grandfather told me before he passed that you'd come up to that cabin one day, to hide, to lick your wounds. He knew you well enough to know it. And he told me, if I was still around when you did, to light the lamp and keep it burning, and let you find your own way down to it, in your own time." He paused. "He said you'd never come if I climbed up there and knocked on your door. You were too proud for that, and too hurt. But a light in the dark, a light a body can choose to walk toward, or not, that you'd come to, eventually, when you were ready." The boy sat very still. "He planned it," he said softly. "All of it, even this. He didn't plan it," the old man said gently. "He just knew you, the way you only know a child you've raised with your whole heart. He knew you'd be hurting, and he knew that the surest way to heal a hurting soul is to give it someone else to care for." His thumb moved over the back of the boy's hand. "He didn't send you down here to be saved, son. He sent you down here to do the saving, because he knew that was the only thing that would ever truly bring you back to yourself." The boy's eyes filled. "And it did," he whispered. "And it did," the old man agreed. "That was the last door. And when it had opened and the boy had walked all the way through it, the old man seemed to settle somehow, as though he had been holding on for just exactly that. The handing over of the last piece, the closing of the circle. When the end did come for the old man, some quiet, while later it came the way the very best of endings come. Warm, intended, and in good company. The boy was there for it. He held the old man's hand, just exactly the way he had promised that he would. The very way he had once, to his long sorrow, been unable to do for the man who raised him. And this time he did not arrive a moment too late. This time he was there, in the room, the whole way through. This time he stayed, right on to the very end of it, and past it, sitting on a good while in the soft firelight, holding a hand gone finally still, letting the grief move through him, slow and clean, like water finding its way downhill. He was not too late, not this time. And in the keeping of that one promise, held faithfully all the way through to the end, the boy found that the old heavy stone he had carried up that mountain, the one he had been so dead certain he would go on carrying the whole rest of his days, had somehow, somewhere in the long night and the longer string of good days that followed it, been quietly set down, He had not failed after all. He had only been waiting. All that time, waiting for his second chance to come walking down toward him, out of the dark. And it had come. It had come at last. He buried the old man up on the ridge in a quiet spot beneath a tall pine, where the morning light came first and the wind was gentle. He set a plain stone there, no long words on it. The old man would not have wanted long words. Just a name, and beneath it, 3 small words the boy chose with great care. He kept the light, because that was the truest thing the boy could think to say of him. Of both of them, really. Of all of them, going back down the long line into the dark. They kept the light, and the light kept them. The seasons turned, the way the seasons do. The boy stayed on, though he was not quite a boy any longer by then. Something in him had grown up and settled in the long doing of the work. The very way his grandfather's young face had looked too grown up and too settled in that old photograph out on the platform. The same early seriousness had come into him now. The same deep patience. The patience of a person who has learned firsthand exactly what the cold is, and exactly what it is worth to a frozen soul to be brought in out of it. He kept the station. He patched whatever needed the patching. He kept the stove well fed, and the woodpile stacked high against the coming winters. He swept the new-laid platform clean of its snow, and every single night, without one exception, before the dark came down over the hollow, he lit the lantern, and he set it in the window, and he let it burn. For a good long while, no one came down out of the dark. And that was all right. That was just fine. The light in the window had never truly been about the coming. It was about the being there, about the promise made and kept and made again, night after night after night, whether or not it was ever once called upon. A light does not need to be needed, the boy had come to understand, in order to be well worth the keeping. So he kept it. He kept it faithfully through the long, quiet seasons, asking nothing back. And in the keeping, he found a thing he had not expected to find, a quiet contentment, a settledness in his own skin. The grief did not leave him entirely, no. Grief like his does not leave a person entirely, and the boy would not have wanted it to. It had become, over the seasons, less a stone, and more a kind of warmth. The warmth of having loved and been loved well. He carried it now the way you carry a coal from one fire to start the next, carefully and with purpose, and glad of its heat. And then, on a cold night, much like the one that had first called him down out of his grief, so long ago now, it happened. The boy was sitting by the warm stove. The watch was in his pocket, where it always rode now, worn smooth and warm against him. The lantern burned its steady amber in the window. The snow drifted down soft and patient over the whole of the hollow, and out beyond the glass, far down at the lost end of where the old rail line used to run, something moved in the dark. A figure, small, stumbling a little in the deep and clinging snow, drawn on and on toward the one warm light in all that cold and empty dark. The way a body lost out in the cold is always, always drawn on toward warmth, without ever quite knowing the why of it. The boy rose up from his chair. His heart was going now, slow and hard, but there was no fear at all in it this time. There was something else entirely, something that felt almost exactly like the very thing his grandfather must have felt all those long years up on the ridge. Each time a new lost one came stumbling out of the dark toward his door, toward his light. He crossed the small warm room. He put his hand on the cold iron latch, and for just one moment before he opened it up, he caught his own reflection there in the dark glass of the window, lit gold by the steady lantern flame. A young man grown all the way into the work now, the watch riding warm in his pocket, the light burning bright at his back. And in that reflection, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw something else, another face laid faint over his own, an older face, serious, patient, kind, the face from the old photograph in the iron box, the face of a boy who had once stood on this very platform, alone, with a pack at his feet, asking the world a question. The grandfather, looking back at him out of his own reflection. And the boy understood then that he was not only himself, standing there in the doorway. He was every link in the long chain that had brought him to it. The frightened child, the faithful station master, the good man on the ridge. They were all of them here, in him, in this one warm room, in this single act of opening a door against the cold. He was not alone. He had never, it turned out, been alone at all. And out beyond the glass, the small figure came on through the softly falling snow, toward the warmth, toward the light, toward the one place in all that dark where somebody had stayed and waited and would not, for anything in this world, turn a cold and frightened soul away from the door. The boy opened it. The warm gold light spilled out across the deep snow, gold against the blue-black dark, the very same way it had once spilled out toward him, on the night that changed the whole of everything. And he stood there in the open doorway, in his own spreading pool of light, one hand resting easy on the frame, the way a person stands when they have heard slow footsteps coming on through the dark, and are not the least bit surprised to hear them. "Come on in, out of that," he called, out into the cold, and the snow, and the dark. And his voice was warm. It carried easy across the frozen ground. "Come on in now, before the weather turns its mind." The small figure stopped. It looked up, and then, slowly, it began to come on toward the light, because the light was burning in the window, because the chain had held, because somebody, once, a long time ago, had come back for a frightened child set down alone in the cold, and that child had grown into a man who came back, in his turn, for others. And that man had raised a boy who learned, on the hardest night of his whole young life, the one truth that outlasts everything else, that the kindest thing one soul can ever do for another, in all this cold and dark and difficult world, is simply and faithfully, and against everything, to stay, and to leave a light on in the window, for whoever it is that comes next out of the dark. The figure climbed the 2 stone steps, worn smooth in their centers by the slow passage of feet across long years, and the boy stepped back from the doorway, not retreating, making room. It was an old, old gesture, but the figure in the cold understood it, the way a person always understands it, somewhere deep down, even when they have forgotten that such a thing as welcome still exists in the world, an offer, an open door, a held-out warmth set out across all that cold. The figure stepped inside, and the door of the old station closed gently against the dark and the snow, and the warm light went on burning in the window, steady and patient and sure, just as it always had, just as it always would, for whoever comes next.